Some houses are abandoned for a reason, but sometimes they are waiting for someone who can hear what still lives inside them. The rain had been falling over Black Hollow Ridge for 3 straight days when Ethan Hale first saw the cabin through the wall of vines. It stood halfway up the mountain like something the forest had decided to swallow whole, its crooked roof barely visible beneath layers of dead ivy and twisting branches. Fog drifted slowly between the pines, wrapping around the structure in pale gray ribbons while the cold November wind whispered through broken shutters that tapped softly against the warped wood siding. Ethan parked his battered Ford pickup beside the rusted mailbox, leaning at an angle near the dirt road, and shut off the engine. Silence settled over the mountain almost immediately, thick and heavy in a way that made the world feel older than it should have. Beside him, Ranger lifted his head from the passenger seat. The 6-year-old German shepherd stared at the cabin without blinking, amber eyes fixed on the dark shape behind the vines. His ears tilted forward slowly, focused, listening. Ethan rubbed a hand along the dog's neck before stepping out into the rain. Mud clung to his boots as he walked toward the porch, carrying only a flashlight and the small ring of keys the old property clerk had handed him an hour earlier down in town. $17, the man had muttered while sliding the paperwork across the counter. That place ain't worth the gas it takes to drive up there. Ethan had simply nodded. He wasn't looking for value anymore. Men like him stopped expecting good deals from life a long time ago. At 40 years old, Ethan carried himself with the quiet endurance of someone who had survived too many winters inside his own mind. His broad shoulders still hinted at the combat engineer he used to be, though the years had worn softer edges into him. A faded canvas jacket hung heavy against his frame, damp from the rain, while streaks of silver threaded through his dark brown hair near the temples. His square jaw carried a few days of rough stubble, and his pale gray eyes scanned the cabin with cautious patience, the same expression he once used while checking damaged roads overseas for buried explosives. Ranger jumped down from the truck and landed beside him with practiced balance. The dog's thick silver-gray coat shimmered wet beneath the porch light, hanging crookedly above the door. For a moment, neither of them moved. The cabin seemed to breathe around them. Rainwater trickled through the gutters with hollow echoes while the mountain wind pushed against the trees in slow waves that sounded almost like distant voices. Ethan unlocked the door. The hinges groaned softly as it opened inward. Cold air rolled out, carrying the scent of mildew, soaked cedar, rust, and something deeper beneath it all. Something metallic. Ranger stopped at the threshold. His body stiffened instantly. Ethan noticed it right away. The dog's tail lowered slightly as his eyes shifted toward the far side of the cabin, toward the northern wall. A low sound rose in Ranger's throat. Not fear. Recognition. Ethan followed his gaze across the dim interior where dust-covered furniture sat frozen beneath hanging cobwebs and years of silence. Then Ranger took one slow step inside and stared directly at the wall beside the stone fireplace. The old floorboards creaked under Ethan's weight as he entered behind him. Rain tapped steadily against the windows while the fading daylight cast pale shadows across the room. Ranger never looked away from that wall. Then, without warning, the dog released 3 short barks into the empty cabin. Sharp, precise, the exact signal he used years ago before finding something hidden underground. Ethan felt the hairs rise slowly along the back of his neck. Because a second later, deep inside the cabin walls, something knocked back. The sound inside the wall faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the rain tapping softly against the cabin windows and the slow crackling groan of old wood settling beneath the mountain cold. Ethan stood motionless near the fireplace, his flashlight aimed toward the northern wall, while Ranger remained rigid beside him, ears high and body tense beneath his wet silver-gray coat. The dog released another low rumble deep in his chest. Focused, alert, listening to something Ethan still could not hear. The room smelled of soaked cedar, dust, and ancient stone. Somewhere deeper inside the cabin, water dripped steadily with the rhythm of a clock no one had touched in years. Ethan took a slow breath and stepped closer to the wall. The faded wallpaper had peeled away in long strips, exposing rough pine boards darkened by age and moisture. Thin vines had pushed through cracks near the ceiling, their roots creeping across the wood like veins searching for light. He pressed his palm against the boards. Cold. Solid. But beneath the cold, there was something else. A faint vibration. So subtle, he almost convinced himself it was imagination. Then Ranger barked once sharply. Ethan glanced down. The dog had shifted his attention toward the floor near the fireplace stones. His nose hovered inches above the warped boards while his tail remained perfectly still. Ethan crouched beside him and swept the flashlight beam lower. Dust covered nearly everything except for one narrow section near the hearth where the wood looked cleaner than the rest, as though something heavy had been dragged across it long ago. Ranger pawed the floor once, then twice. Ethan frowned. "You found something, boy?" Ranger responded by pressing his nose against the crack between two floorboards. The old shepherd had done the same thing years earlier in Kandahar after detecting a buried weapons cache beneath collapsed concrete. Back then, Ethan had trusted the dog more than any equipment they carried. He still did. Outside, thunder rolled low through the mountains while wind pushed rain against the cabin hard enough to rattle the windows. The lights flickered once overhead before settling into a dim amber glow. Ethan noticed the electrical wires running along the ceiling. Strange. The power should not have still been active this far up the ridge. According to the clerk in town, the cabin had been abandoned for nearly 30 years. Ranger suddenly froze again. His ears twitched toward the wall. 3 seconds later, Ethan heard it. Knock. A dull metallic sound buried somewhere behind the boards. Then silence. Ethan slowly stood, every muscle tightening. Beneath his jacket, the sound had not come from outside. It had come from inside the wall itself. Ranger backed away from the fireplace, eyes fixed upward now. Ethan followed the dog's stare toward the rusted vent pipe running from the old wood stove into the ceiling. A soft vibration traveled through the metal. Rhythmic. Precise. Ethan checked his watch out of instinct. 27 seconds passed. Then another faint knock echoed behind the wall. His expression darkened immediately. Too regular to be random. Combat engineers learned to respect patterns. Patterns meant systems. Systems meant purpose. Ranger began pacing slowly across the room, nails clicking against the floorboards while the storm deepened outside. Ethan moved toward the nearest window and wiped away years of grime with his sleeve. Through the rain and fog, he could barely make out the outline of the forest surrounding the cabin. Tall black pines swayed in the darkness like silent watchers standing guard over the ridge. Then lightning flashed across the mountain sky. For half a second, the woods illuminated bright silver. Ethan's breath caught. Someone had carved symbols into the trees surrounding the cabin. Large faded marks cut deep into the bark decades earlier. Numbers. Military numbers. Ranger barked sharply again behind him. Ethan turned just in time to see the old fireplace grate slowly shift open by itself with a long scraping groan from beneath the floor. The rusted fireplace grate scraped open another inch with a sound that echoed through the cabin like old iron waking from sleep. Ethan stepped back instinctively while Ranger moved forward at the same moment, his broad shoulders stiff beneath his damp fur, amber eyes locked onto the darkness below the hearth. Cold air drifted upward through the opening, carrying the scent of wet stone, machine oil, and something older hidden beneath decades of dust. The storm outside pressed harder against the mountain, wind moving through the pine trees in long, mournful waves that seemed to circle the cabin itself. Ethan crouched carefully beside the fireplace and aimed his flashlight downward through the narrow gap. Stone steps disappeared beneath the cabin into blackness. Not a cellar. Something deeper. The walls below looked reinforced with poured concrete and steel beams darkened by age. Ranger released a low growl and glanced toward the front windows again. Ethan followed his gaze. Another flash of lightning illuminated the woods outside for a brief second. The military markings carved into the trees stretched farther than he first realized, circling the entire ridge around the property like boundary signs hidden in plain sight. Then darkness swallowed them again. Ethan rubbed a hand along his jaw slowly, his mind turning through old memories he had spent years trying to bury. Reinforced bunkers, underground support tunnels, emergency fallout structures. He had helped build places like this overseas, places designed not to be found. Ranger suddenly turned toward the front door, ears high. Footsteps crunched faintly outside on wet gravel. Ethan stood immediately. The sound stopped before reaching the porch. Silence returned. Heavy and watchful, he crossed the cabin slowly and opened the door. Rain drifted sideways through the mountain fog, while cold wind pushed against him hard enough to sting his face. The dirt road below the ridge sat empty beneath the storm clouds. No headlights. No movement. Only the distant sway of pine trees beneath flashes of silver lightning. Ethan stepped farther onto the porch and noticed fresh tire tracks cutting through the mud near the mailbox. Deep tread marks. Recent. Someone else had been there within the last few hours. Ranger barked sharply behind him. Ethan turned back toward the cabin interior just as the overhead light flickered again. Once. Twice. Then steadied. But now a new sound drifted upward from beneath the fireplace. Music. Faint and distorted beneath static. Ethan froze in the doorway. It sounded like an old radio transmission struggling through interference. Ranger stood beside the hearth with his head tilted slightly, listening with complete focus. Ethan stepped back inside and closed the door against the storm. The static crackled softly through the floorboards. Then a man's voice emerged for half a second before fading again. Calm. Low. Almost swallowed by time itself. Ethan could not make out the words. He moved toward the opening carefully, boots creaking against the old wood floor. Ranger descended the first stair before stopping halfway down and looking back up at him. Waiting. Ethan grabbed the lantern from the kitchen counter and lit it with the last dry match he carried in his jacket pocket. Warm amber light spread across the cabin walls, pushing shadows into the corners. He stared down into the darkness beneath the hearth for a long moment while rain drummed steadily overhead. The underground air rising from below felt strangely warm compared to the freezing mountain wind outside. Too warm, as though whatever existed beneath the cabin had never fully gone dormant. Ethan finally stepped onto the first concrete stair. Ranger moved ahead immediately, his nails clicking softly against the steps as they descended deeper beneath the mountain. The opening above them shrank with every step downward until the storm outside became nothing more than a distant murmur. 20 feet below the cabin, the staircase ended at a thick steel door standing slightly open. Rust streaked its surface, but the faded military insignia painted across the center was still visible beneath the dust. Ethan lifted the lantern higher and felt his chest tighten slowly as the light revealed the symbol completely. It was the same engineering division his father had served in before disappearing 32 years earlier. The faded insignia on the steel door seemed to pull the warmth from Ethan's chest. He stared at it through the lantern glow while dust drifted slowly through the underground air like pale ash suspended in still water. Ranger stood directly beside the opening, silent now, his ears twitching toward the darkness beyond the door. The old German shepherd had stopped growling. Whatever waited deeper inside this place no longer felt like danger to him. It felt familiar. Ethan swallowed hard and ran his fingers along the edge of the rusted symbol. The same engineering division. The same mountain insignia his father once wore stitched onto his field jacket in a photograph Ethan had kept buried inside a drawer for most of his adult life. Daniel Hale had vanished during a classified operation in the Appalachian region when Ethan was only 8 years old. No body had ever been recovered. No explanation had ever made sense. The military called it an equipment accident during severe weather conditions. But even as a boy, Ethan remembered the silence surrounding it. The way officers avoided eye contact at the funeral. The way his mother stopped trusting official answers after that day. Ranger moved first, stepping carefully through the steel doorway into the darkness beyond. Ethan lifted the lantern and followed. The room opened into a long underground corridor reinforced with concrete walls stained dark from age and moisture. Thick pipes lined the ceiling overhead, while old electrical cables disappeared deeper into the mountain. The air smelled of iron, machine oil, and damp stone untouched by sunlight for decades. Yet somehow the lights still worked. Dim yellow bulbs flickered weakly along the corridor every 20 feet, humming softly like tired insects trapped underground. Ethan slowed as his boots echoed through the passage. Every sound felt magnified down there. Every breath. Every step. Somewhere deeper within the structure, water dripped steadily into metal with perfect rhythm. Ranger paused near a rusted bulletin board hanging crookedly along the wall. Papers still clung to it beneath layers of dust and yellowed tape. Ethan brushed one carefully with his sleeve. Most of the words had faded beyond recognition, but one sentence remained visible beneath the grime. Black Hollow Emergency Operations Facility. Below it sat a date. October 14th, 1989. Ethan stared at it quietly. The same year his father disappeared. A faint crackle suddenly echoed through the corridor ahead. Static. Then the sound of an old radio transmitter struggling to reconnect after years of silence. Ranger's ears lifted instantly. Ethan followed the sound deeper underground until the corridor widened into a large operations room buried beneath the mountain itself. Dust-covered control panels lined the walls beside ancient communication equipment and dead computer monitors thick with cobwebs. Maps still hung pinned to the concrete walls showing the entire Black Hollow Ridge region marked with strange red circles and handwritten coordinates. At the center of the room stood a long steel table beneath a hanging lamp that flickered weakly overhead. On the table sat a reel-to-reel tape recorder slowly spinning by itself. Ethan stopped breathing for a moment. The machine should not have been running. Ranger approached it cautiously, nose twitching toward the spinning tape. Then the static cleared. A man's voice filled the underground room. Calm, tired, familiar enough to make Ethan's chest tighten instantly. If anyone finds this facility, do not trust the ridge above the North Valley. Ethan felt the lantern tremble slightly in his grip. The voice continued beneath layers of interference. The mountain is unstable. They buried something beneath Sector 12. We were ordered to seal it and leave. Ranger looked back toward Ethan, amber eyes reflecting the weak overhead light. Then the tape crackled violently before the voice returned one final time. If my son ever hears this. Ethan, I am sorry. Silence swallowed the room. The tape stopped spinning. Somewhere above them, thunder rolled across the mountain while the entire underground facility trembled softly beneath the weight of the storm. The underground room settled into silence after the tape stopped spinning, but the weight of the voice lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Ethan stood motionless beside the steel table while the lantern light trembled softly across the concrete walls. Hearing his father's voice again after 32 years felt less like memory and more like stepping into a place where time itself had never fully moved on. Ranger pressed close beside him, calm now, his breathing slow and steady beneath the distant hum of the underground facility. Somewhere deep within the mountain, machinery groaned faintly as if old systems were waking one piece at a time. Ethan lowered himself carefully into the metal chair near the recorder and stared at the maps spread across the table. Red circles covered sections of Black Hollow Ridge, each marked with handwritten notes and military codes faded by age. One location, near the northern valley, had been crossed out repeatedly in thick black ink. Beside it, someone had written a warning in sharp block letters. Do not excavate below Sector 12. Ethan ran a hand slowly across his face. His father had spent years hiding something beneath this mountain, not protecting it from enemies, protecting it from being uncovered. Ranger suddenly lifted his head toward the far side of the operations room. Ethan followed the dog's gaze toward another steel door half concealed behind filing cabinets collapsed beneath dust and fallen ceiling debris. Unlike the others, this door looked newer, cleaner. Sign. Restricted access, authorized engineers only. Ethan stepped closer and noticed photographs scattered across a nearby desk beneath a layer of dust. He picked one up carefully. The picture showed a group of engineers standing beside excavation machinery somewhere deep underground. Ethan recognized his father instantly. Younger, smiling faintly beneath a hard hat. Beside him stood another man Ethan had never seen before, holding blueprints rolled beneath one arm. Written across the bottom of the photograph in fading ink were 5 words that made Ethan's stomach tighten slowly. Project Lazarus. Ranger barked sharply near the vault. Ethan turned toward him just as the dog scratched once at the concrete floor beside the massive door. Heavier somehow, carrying a faint mineral scent mixed with damp stone and old electricity. Sure. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Someone had been there recently. Fresh boot prints marked the dust along the steel walkway ahead. Not old military tracks preserved by time. Recent ones. The realization tightened his chest immediately. He was not the first person to rediscover this place. A distant metallic clang echoed across the cavern. Ranger barked sharply. Ethan spun toward the sound just in time to see a light moving briefly behind one of the turbine structures before disappearing again into darkness. Someone else was underground with them. The cavern fell silent once more except for the slow pulse of machinery beneath the mountain and the endless movement of glowing water below. Then, from somewhere across the lake, an old speaker crackled to life through static. A calm, elderly voice drifted through the underground darkness. If you found the lake, then the mountain finally chose to let you in. The voice drifting through the underground speaker carried the slow calmness of someone who had spent many years listening to silence. Ethan stood frozen on the steel walkway, while the glowing lake beneath the mountain reflected pale blue light across the cavern ceiling. Ranger remained perfectly still beside him, ears forward, eyes fixed toward the darkness beyond the turbines. The old shepherd was not afraid. He was waiting. The speaker crackled softly again. Most people hear the ridge and turn back, the elderly voice continued. But the mountain remembers certain families. Ethan tightened his grip around the lantern handle. "Who are you?" he called across the cavern. For several seconds, only the hum of the turbines answered him. Then somewhere beyond the machinery, a warm yellow light appeared. Sound deep in his throat and sat down calmly at Ethan's side. The man noticed immediately. "Good dog," he said softly, his voice echoing through the cavern. Old man noticed it too. His eyes narrowed beneath the lantern glow. "They finally came back," he whispered. Ethan felt the underground air shift around them, as though the mountain itself had inhaled deeply. Somewhere far above, thunder rolled across the ridge. Then the cavern lights flickered violently for half a second before stabilizing again. The old man looked back toward Ethan with quiet urgency now. "Your father hid something before the collapse. Proof. Land deeds. Ownership records. Everything needed to protect this mountain forever." He pointed toward the enormous vault door across the lake, barely visible in the shadows. "And whatever happens tonight, do not let them open Sector 12. The cavern lights dimmed again as thunder rolled through the mountain above, and for a brief moment the glowing lake beneath the steel walkways looked almost alive, its blue surface pulsing softly beneath the darkness like the slow heartbeat of the ridge itself. Ethan stood beside the old man, while Ranger watched the shadows near the turbines without blinking. Somewhere across the underground chamber, metal groaned faintly, as if another door had opened deeper within the facility. The old man tightened his grip on the lantern. "They have been searching for the vault for years," he said quietly. "But your father hid the final access key where only blood could find it." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering directly, the old man reached into the pocket of his weathered coat and removed a small brass compass darkened by age. He handed it carefully to Ethan. The moment Ethan touched it, he recognized the deep scratch across the glass cover instantly. His father used to carry this compass everywhere during camping trips when Ethan was a child. Daniel Hale once told him that mountains could confuse maps, but a compass always listened to the earth itself. Ethan stared at it silently, while old memories surfaced beneath the sound of the underground water. Ranger suddenly barked twice toward the far end of the cavern. The shadow moved again behind the turbines, closer this time. Ethan could not see a face, only the faint beam of a flashlight sweeping briefly across the steel supports before vanishing into darkness. The old man lowered his voice. "We do not have much time." He pointed toward a narrow maintenance bridge extending over the glowing lake toward the opposite side of the cavern. "The control chamber beyond Sector 12 contains every deed, mineral contract, and ownership record tied to this ridge. Your father transferred the land rights before the collapse. Legally, Black Hollow Ridge belongs to the surrounding towns now, not the consortium." Ethan looked toward the distant vault door half hidden in shadows. "Then why keep it buried?" The old man's pale blue eyes reflected the water beneath them. "Because some secrets become dangerous when greed finds them." Warm mist drifted slowly upward from the underground lake, while the turbines hummed with deep, steady rhythm around the cavern walls. Ethan followed the maintenance bridge carefully beside Ranger, the old shepherd moving several steps ahead, as though he already knew where the path led. The steel walkway vibrated faintly beneath their boots every 27 seconds. The same pulse, the same rhythm hidden inside the cabin walls. Halfway across the bridge, Ethan noticed strange markings etched along the metal rails. Handwritten measurements, dates, engineering calculations. His father's handwriting. Daniel Hale had walked this exact bridge decades earlier while trying to protect whatever rested beneath the ridge. The realization settled heavily in Ethan's chest. He was not uncovering a mystery anymore. He was finishing something his father never got the chance to complete. They reached the opposite platform, where another reinforced door stood partially concealed behind thick pipes running along the cavern wall. Unlike the others, this door carried no rust at all. A small biometric scanner still glowed faint green beside the handle. Ethan stared at it uncertainly. The old man stepped closer behind him. "Your father designed the final lock himself." Ethan glanced at the scanner. "After 30 years?" The old man nodded slowly. "Some systems underground never lost power. The lake keeps everything alive." Ranger sat beside the door, ears high and alert. Toward the darkness behind them, Ethan placed his hand carefully against the scanner. For one long second, nothing happened. Then soft mechanical clicks echoed inside the wall. The green light brightened. Deep locking bars shifted slowly inside the steel. The door opened inward with a long hydraulic sigh. Warm golden light spilled into the cavern from the room beyond. Ethan stepped inside and stopped immediately. Shelves filled with thick binders and sealed metal cases lined the chamber walls from floor to ceiling. At the center of the room stood a large wooden table beneath a hanging lamp. Resting on the table was a single photograph. A younger Daniel Hale stood smiling beside a little boy holding a brass compass in both hands. Beneath the photo sat one final handwritten note waiting in the silence. "Ethan, if you found this place, the mountain finally trusted you too." The note trembled slightly in Ethan's hands while the warm light inside the hidden chamber wrapped around the silence like the glow of an old memory finally returning home. Ranger lay down quietly beside the wooden table, his amber eyes calm now, the tension that had followed him since entering the cabin finally gone. The underground facility no longer felt hostile. It felt finished. Ethan lowered himself slowly into the chair beside the photograph and stared at the image of his father smiling beside him all those years ago. He had not seen that expression in decades. Not since before the military officers arrived at their front door, carrying folded flags and careful half-truths. Dust drifted lazily through the golden light, while the underground lake hummed softly beyond the chamber walls. Ethan unfolded the handwritten note carefully. The paper had yellowed with age, but the ink remained clear. "Your mother once told me that some places carry a soul of their own. I did not believe her until I found this mountain. If you are reading this now, then the ridge finally trusted you enough to reveal what we protected. The land deeds inside this room belong to the towns surrounding Black Hollow Ridge. Keep them safe. Do not let greed bury this place again." Ethan swallowed hard as he continued reading. "The men who wanted the minerals beneath this mountain believed power only came from ownership. But the lake taught me something different. Real power protects. It does not consume." Ranger lifted his head suddenly toward the chamber entrance. But this time, there was no growl. Only quiet attention. The old man stepped slowly into the room carrying the lantern low beside him. "The others are gone," he said softly. "The storm forced them back down the ridge." Ethan looked up. "Who are they?" The old man sighed faintly. "Investors. Developers. Men who hear words like billions and forget mountains are alive too." He glanced around the chamber one last time. "Your father spent his final weeks making certain this place could never legally belong to them." Ethan looked toward the shelves filled with deeds and records. Everything the towns needed to protect Black Hollow Ridge had been hidden beneath the cabin all along. The old man smiled faintly at Ranger resting beside the table. "The shepherd knew before any of us did." Outside the chamber, the turbine slowed gradually as dawn approached above the mountain. Ethan and the old man spent the next several hours carrying records through the underground corridors while Ranger guided them back through the maze of tunnels with calm certainty. By the time they reached the cabin again, the storm had finally passed. Morning light spilled softly across the ridge, turning the rain-covered vines silver beneath the rising sun. Mist drifted through the pine trees while distant birdsong returned to the mountain for the first time since Ethan arrived. He stepped onto the porch and breathed in the cold, clean air. The cabin no longer felt abandoned. It felt awake. Ranger settled beside the front steps, watching the forest with relaxed eyes while sunlight warmed his thick gray coat. Ethan noticed something then. Tiny white flowers had begun blooming along the tangled vines wrapped around the cabin walls. Fresh blossoms opening after the storm. The old man stood quietly beside the truck, preparing to leave. "Your father used to say the ridge only revealed itself to people who still knew how to listen." Ethan looked out across Black Hollow. ridge while morning wind moved gently through the trees. For the first time in many years, the silence inside him no longer felt empty. Somewhere deep beneath the mountain, the underground lake continued its steady pulse beneath stone and earth, hidden but alive. Ethan rested one hand against Ranger's neck as the old shepherd leaned quietly against him. He finally understood why the cabin had waited all these years beneath the vines and rain and silence. Some places are not lost. They are simply waiting for the right soul to come home. Hi, friend. Before you go, if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you why respect matters, please hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. And share this video so more people around the world can hear stories that deserve to be heard. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. Thank you for being